So this panel is firsthand accounts witnessing the proceedings of the Military Commission. And the proceedings at Guantanamo Bay, it's an example of one of the myriad of unsolved issues that continue today. So many families have not had the opportunity to travel to Guantanamo. Some have followed the proceedings from afar. Others may have just tuned out of frustration because the pretrial proceedings have dragged on for decades. And here we are 24 years later. And now we have the next generation of family members emerging, many who were not informed or involved with this whole process. So in advance of the anniversary, we thought it was really important to provide some history. The officials are not able to talk about it publicly. And so we thought we would again, tell the stories through the people that have been involved in going to Guantanamo. And we actually had a webinar, I don't know, it was a month ago or 2 months ago. And it was so well received and so fascinating that I thought it would be good to do it again today. So the Guantanamo Bay Detention Camp, it's a U.S. military prison in Cuba that opened in January of 2002 to hold suspected 9/11 terrorists. Since then, the military commissions have been mired in legal challenges, delays, and controversy, raising difficult questions about justice, accountability, and the enduring impact on victims' families as they await official military commission trials. So we have today with us, again, I'll start at the other end. Now he's not John, now he's Jack Ryan. And you heard about Jack earlier, a former chief of Department of the Port Authority Police and commander of the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And then we have, next to Jack is Colleen Kelly, and Colleen is a co-founder of September 11th Families for Peaceful Tomorrows. Colleen's brother, Bill Kelly Jr. was killed on 9/11 at the age of 30 at the World Trade Center. And then we have Deborah Garcia. Deborah also is a family member. Her husband, David, was killed on 9/11, leaving behind two sons who were 8 and 4 years old at the time. And Deborah is a justice advocate for victims of terrorism and is currently writing a memoir. And then last but not least, we have John Ryan, the journalist, and with Lawdragon. And John is an award-winning journalist with 25 years of experience covering complex issues related to the criminal and civil justice systems, human rights, and global justice. He co-manages Lawdragon's day-to-day operations and regularly reports from Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, on the military commissions. His book on the case, which was just published, John, right? America's Trial, he's going to be signing copies there if anyone's interested in purchasing it. And it went from, 200 pages, John, to 400 pages. So for those academics in the audience, I think you'll benefit from reading his novel. So I am going to sit down, join the group here. And then we'll get started. John, we're going to start with you. You've been there since the very beginning. Could you explain to the audience your role and what that experience has been like?
Sure. So I started going to Guantanamo Bay in 2015. I actually My company, Lawdragon, one of the things we do is we profile prominent lawyers, and so I went to just do a profile of one of the lawyers, actually the lead lawyer for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was accused of planning 9/11. And when I went there were so few journalists that I decided to at least cover that hearing and write some stories about the hearing. And then I went to the next hearing later in 2015, and again, so few journalists that I just kept I just decided that I should keep covering the case. And so I've now been to every hearing in the case since 2015, and I've done close to 60 reporting trips. And probably I've spent about a third of my life on the base over the past decade, not including the year and a half of the pandemic when the base mostly shut down. But yeah, and so recently I decided to, well, not recently, but recently my book was published, and I was lucky to find a publisher who agreed that the story was not, hey, let's wait for the trial, because there are such complications in getting to the trial, that I wanted to document what's happened in the past decade, which is sort of why it hasn't really worked out so well, getting what was expected to be the trial of the century going. In fact, there's still not a trial date on the calendar. And so going to Guantanamo is not that difficult for journalists. The Pentagon puts out an advisory explaining that a hearing is coming up, and then you can apply to go. And then generally you'll get approved. They probably do some type of background check. And for journalists, the flights are $800 flying out of Joint Base Andrews. We all take the same flight to get there. And then the hearings generally last for 2 to 4 weeks. There's a lot of reasons why there's not a trial date scheduled, or why a trial hasn't happened yet. I think it was a new court system. It's had a lot of sort of wrinkles to iron out, but from my point of view, and what really the book is about, is the complication posed by the fact that the defendants, the 5 Guantanamo detainees who are accused of planning 9/11, were previously held by the CIA before they were sent to Guantanamo Bay. And there they went through what the many critics call torture techniques in order to extract intelligence. And then they were sent to Gitmo, and then the criminal case eventually started. And so really a lot of the pretrial proceedings has focused on whether, when they got to Guantanamo Bay and confessed to their roles in 9/11, whether that's a valid confession because they had been tortured and held in isolation for the years prior. And that's probably, most of what has happened in the pretrial case. There's lots of other issues. There's been hundreds of pretrial motions, but dealing with how the defendants were treated prior to getting to Gitmo by the CIA has been the dominant issue. And as that fight was playing out, as some of you probably know, 3 of the defendants, including Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, attempted to plead guilty. That was about 14 months ago. So it looked like the case might be getting to some type of conclusion, but the Secretary of Defense at the time, Lloyd Austin, withdrew from those agreements, and the civilian appellate court that oversees the commissions recently signed off on that, on Austin's ability to do so. So those plea deals are now off, and the 9/11 case is sort of in a new period of uncertainty where 3 of the defendants still want to plead guilty, and they're going to pursue that to higher appellate courts, possibly the Supreme Court, and then 2 other defendants are sort of on separate tracks. So I think about a year ago, when the publisher and I were hoping to get the book out about now, there was a chance that the case would really be mostly resolved with at some point a sentencing trial for the people who were pleading guilty. Now all of that is sort of off the table for the time being. So, and with all these issues still pending, the government team, the prosecution, believes that the case can move forward and start dealing with other pretrial issues to move the case along. But the defense teams believe that while these matters are under appeal, nothing can happen. So I wish we were in a different state for sort of getting what still is the biggest case in U.S. history, and will only probably get bigger, kind of getting it going, but it's really in a period where we don't exactly know what the course will be.
Well, and the journalists are playing a key role in really reporting out what's going on there. So many of the testimonies, have to go through all of these approvals process, so there's still things missing from the site. And Jack, you talked before too, John, you talked before about how the trial sort of makes progress and then goes back 3 steps because, they're going back to another issue from time to time. Can you talk a little bit about that?
And I think that's why the case is so difficult to follow. I think from the observers who have attempted to follow it, even journalists, it's really difficult because everything sort of happens out of order, right? I mean, we travel to Gitmo for 2 to 4 weeks, and then you might have witnesses that testify in that hearing, and then you might have to wait for the next hearing for another witness to testify, and then maybe at some point later, they'll have final oral arguments on the issue, and then maybe 12 months after that even, the judge might rule. So nothing in the case has really happened in an understandable sequence, and because it's taken so long, I think now, after this little kind of period of turmoil with the plea deals being on and then off, there's now a 5th judge on the case. The 5th judge to preside over hearings will start his tenure of the case in December. And of course, he has to learn a court record that is in excess of 50,000 pages of transcripts. And literally, if you try to count the amount of pages in pleadings, it'd probably, it'd be in the hundreds of thousands. So it's almost getting to the point, and that's really why, I think, not to keep touting the book, but that is really why we wanted to get the book out now, because our concern is that a lot of this would just be lost to history if you keep waiting and waiting for a resolution. It might not come, at least it might not come in a way that is sort of clean and understandable. So those are really the challenges of anyone following the case, including journalists who are interested and who have intermittently dropped in. By the time they get back to take a look at what's been happening, it's sort of hard to understand what's been going on.
And then, Deborah, you were busy raising your 2 boys, and you became involved in traveling there. How did you decide, more recently, how did you decide to get involved in that process?
Well, I had been watching off the sidelines on and off what was going on there, but it was very confusing and mystifying, and I had received invitations in the past to attend.
Can you put the mic closer to you?
I'm sorry. So I had received had been receiving invitations to attend the hearings for several years, and I was raising my children. I was trying to create a new life with a new marriage and in a new state. And so I just kind of watched a little bit from the sidelines, reading newspaper reports and things that came through. But again, there were so many other things going on with 9/11 in terms of the Saudi Arabia suit with JASTA law that was being that we were working on, and a lot of advocacy things that I was just kind of doing indirectly. So I became involved in attending proceedings at Gitmo and learning about that in great detail in November of 2023. And when I first went there, again, everything was a mystery to me. And I drove to Andrews Air Force Base from Burlington, Vermont, where I currently live, the night before. Stayed overnight in a hotel because we meet at 7:30 in the morning at the base. And we're met there by people from the Victims Witness Protection Program, which are part of the Department of Defense. And once I arrived at Guantanamo Bay, I was greeted very warmly by everyone. And then from that point on, they take over and they escort you through the entire week and the entire process. And that's where my education began. And I was very intimidated initially to ask questions because I'm not a lawyer. I used to be a speech and language pathologist and a feeding therapist once upon a time. Of course, I couldn't continue that after my husband disappeared on 9/11. My husband, David Garcia,
Back a little bit.
I'm sorry, my husband, David Garcia, was 40 years old when he was murdered on the 97th floor of the North Tower, and he was a IT consultant with Marcia McLennan. And my two children on that day were on two different buses. One was on a bus to his school, which was near Kennedy Airport, and the other one, my 4-year-old, was on a bus going in the opposite direction to a local school for his first day of pre-kindergarten. And I don't want to go too much into my experience that day, but I really thought that we obviously were being attacked. As I was watching the whole thing unfold on TV, Sesame Street had been on the television before I took my son to the bus stop. And when I came back in, it was about a little bit after 8:30 a.m., and I was sipping some coffee, getting ready for my day, and I noticed that the screen had gone quiet, and Big Bird had been replaced by the North Tower, the smoke coming out of the North Tower. And at that point, the reports were that there was some kind of explosion. And then I watched, a few minutes later, I watched the second plane hit the tower. And at that point, I really started to believe that we were being attacked and we were all going to die together, but separately, because we were all scattered about. And then in 2020, I lost our son to prolonged grief disorder. And my second marriage had also fallen apart. So I was like mad. I was overcome with grief. And I just felt like I had to get out. I had to not stay in this awful space, and I had to be a voice actively for my husband and now my son, and my other son as well, my surviving son. And so when I was introduced to the people from the Victims Witness Assistance Program and all of these good people here, I really felt like I had joined another family, another fraternity. And I'm involved in so many of these fraternities. And attending the the hearings in Cuba really empowered me. I'm a poet, and I brought some of my poetry with me. And one of the great benefits of attending is not only the people that you meet, and you get to meet people who are from the Pentagon, people who have relatives who are on the planes, not just the people that I'm typically associated with, which has to do with the World Trade Center. And I also got to meet with counsel, with the government prosecutors, with the defense counsel. And I wasn't going to speak during that first conference meeting, because they always set up meetings for us when we're there, if we want to participate. And then when it came around to me to introduce myself, and they wanted to hear my story, and I started to tell my story, and then I started to pass the poetry around. And it really changed the ether in the room. I felt that power in my voice, and it's what keeps bringing me back.
Well, thank you, Deborah. I'm going to turn it over to Colleen Kelly, who I've known since the beginning of time. But Colleen, could you explain, your background and how and when you got involved?
Sure. I think we first met Mary in either late fall or winter of 2002, when family groups were meeting down around here at Ground Zero, near Ground Zero. But I became involved because I put my name in what was then the lottery. There was a victim and family lottery system. So I put my name in the lottery system in 2008. And I know that because I got I have a piece of paper that says your name is officially there. And my name was picked in 2015. So 7 years later, I was able to travel to Cuba. And when you travel there as a family member, you can bring a support person, whoever that may be. So I brought my mom, Joanne Kelly, who, this is an issue I think that is especially important to this community. My mom died last summer without seeing any kind of resolution of the case, without even seeing a trial date. So part of this as time goes on and how much it's just really to amplify how long we've been waiting for movement in this case. But I actually we figured this out now, John and I, Ryan, we were together, our first trips were at the same time. Mm-hmm. So I became really interested, and with the organization that I'm with, we decided to send, I traveled as a family member, but the organization that I work with, Peaceful Tomorrows, we decided to apply for non-governmental organization observer status, and that was in late 2015. And when you apply to travel as an NGO, you can then send a representative from your organization to each hearing. So that's what we've done, since the beginning of 2016. So I've had the opportunity to attend both as a family member and as an NGO observer. And the experiences are a little bit different, and we can talk about that as much as you want, but it's, like Deborah, I'm not a lawyer, but you learn a lot of legal language. You have the opportunity to see things for yourself and to speak with both the prosecution and the defense and the journalists and other NGOs, which I appreciate because sometimes the NGOs who are there really are attorneys who do this work all the time. So it's been an education, an education of the heart too. I feel like we all honor our loved ones in different ways, and this felt part of the way to honor my brother and to work towards achieving some kind of semblance of justice for the murder of nearly 3,000 people. So.
Well, and you can't take pictures there. And so I wondered if you could, Colleen was going to share some sketches that were done by
Janet Hamlin. Yeah, so security there is very intense. There's many layers of security, of course, getting into the courthouse, and the courthouse is this big tin box, which is not functional when it rains because it's so loud when it's raining, and it rains at Guantanamo. Not often, but it does. But so there's a lot of security, and one of those things is when you're entering into the courthouse, you may not have any kind of electric device whatsoever, not even a Fitbit, any kind of electronics. You are allowed to bring into the courthouse pencils or pens and papers, but you're not allowed to sketch as a regular person. They have allowed sketch artists, I think 3 times, John, maybe, correct me if I'm wrong. And Janet Hamlin is one of those sketch artists who was able to sketch pictures of courtroom scenes, and then it is approved by Pentagon officials for release so that we have some idea of what it looks like. Because it's, as Deborah said, it's scary and it's overwhelming, and there's so many layers of overwhelmingness that it's hard. So I found some of these sketches, at least I knew a teeny bit of what it would look like.
Do you want to bring those up, Jason? Oh, there we go. So you can see here.
Okay.
You can advance them if
Oh,
you
great.
want.
Okay, so I think left and right will be the same for me as everybody
Yes,
else. Okay, so this, what you're seeing here is the people in the foreground of the picture, that's the viewing area. And it's the left side of the viewing area, so that would be where the journalists primarily sit in that first row, so they have good vision of what's happening in the courtroom. And then behind that is the NGO observers, and people who are on base, including military people, can visit and can attend the trials that day if they have off or if they choose to, and distinguished visitors as well. So you'll notice that there's, maybe you can't really see it, it's glass. There's a triple pane window between the viewing area and the actual courtroom on the other side. Way in the back, you see, well, you can kind of see the judge in his robe up on a pedestal kind of thing. To the left side of this sketch is the defense teams. They sit on the left side. And on the right side of the sketch is the prosecution teams. And there's someone standing facing the judge. That would be whoever is speaking at that time, because there's court reporters there. Everything is documented. Every word is documented. That's very important, both for history, but it's a record of a judicial proceeding. The other thing I would mention is on top you see it's TV screens. So there's a 40-second time delay between what is happening inside the courtroom and the viewing area, which is a little confusing because what we're seeing what's happening in real time, but in front of us. But when you look up on the screens, the monitors, thanks, John. When you look up on the monitors, there's a 40-second delay. So if any of you have visited the viewing sites here in the United States, we see the same thing in the viewing area that is being shown at the viewing sites here in the US with that 40-second delay. And that's for security purposes and for any kind of spills of classified information. Then there's the ability to kind of shut the proceedings down before classified information is heard by people who are not supposed to be hearing that.
You had other slides then?
I'm sorry?
There's other slides.
Yes, there's a couple other slides. Okay, so this is the left side of the courtroom. This is a picture of the 5 defendants. They sit on the far left, that kind of greenish in the background. There's always military personnel sitting next to the left of the 5 accused. Sitting next to the accused are some of their legal teams. The accused always sit in the same spot, so you know who is who in the chain there. And there's a lot of people because there's 5 accused. That's unusual. So I've been told that there's usually one person on trial, but this is even more complicated because there's 5 people. Okay, this is the family side of the viewing area. So this would be the right side of the viewing area. Again, we're behind that triple pane glass, and this is where the family sit, which is nice. We're together, and you get to know one another over the week. I see good friends here from week's visits in the past. And there's also a curtain that separates the victim family seating area from where the journalists and the NGOs sit. So sometimes the family members choose to close the curtain. Sometimes they don't. It's done by consensus there. But the family members were also on a 40-second delay. And this last slide, or maybe it's the second to last, yeah. So this is just a picture. You can see that was Judge Pohl. That was the first judge. We're now up to Judge number 5. That's just kind of a larger picture. You see a witness in the witness box. And to the right, you see the first Chief Prosecutor, General Martins, who was with us for the first bulk of the pretrial hearings. Lastly, this is not the 9/11 trial. This is a different hearing. But it's been going on now for, 2012, Matt, 13 and a half years. The pretrial hearings. We're not at the trial yet. So this is a picture of, they now have witnesses who don't come to Guantanamo, because once you commit to Guantanamo, you're pretty much there for a week, unless there's an emergency. You are there for a week. So some witnesses can testify from what's called the remote hearing room, and that's at an undisclosed location in Virginia. Then they have the opportunity to go home for the day. So that was, I don't really remember when that was introduced. John, maybe after COVID? Maybe.
It was during the pandemic, so it's officially an extension of the courtroom in Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah, okay. So same rules apply. Witnesses get sworn in just like everywhere else. But it's kind of another layer of separateness. This is all so separate anyway. You're in Cuba watching an American trial for, it's another layer of separateness that now you have a witness who may be testifying from somewhere in Virginia that it's just different because you miss some stuff with body language and whatnot. And I think that's the last slide.
And Colleen, how long have you been going to Guantanamo? You said 2008?
Well, that's when I put my name in the lottery. I've been going since 2015. So I go often, as the two Johns can attest to. And I think the theme of voices has been brought up quite a few times here today, and I think we all use our voices in different ways. So this is something that has really helped me in my journey for justice for my brother, and it's not for everyone, but I hope we all can use our voices in ways that are meaningful and impactful and healing for us.
Well, and Deborah, when the last time we did this presentation, when we were preparing, she said, this will demystify. You know, I think hearing their experience demystifies, you know, something that's, you know, out of the area, out of sight, out of mind. And so, you know, I really appreciate them sharing their experience. Now, John, how about you? Because you have, you know, you're coming from a different perspective.
Yeah, so having been involved in the case since, having been involved with the case since September 11th, up until 2023, you know, I was actively involved, you know, in the Joint Terrorism Task Force, in the investigation, locating witnesses, pretty much every aspect of the case, except traveling to Guantanamo, because, you know, the majority of the victims were either from New York or New Jersey. So, you know, the prosecution would come up to New York and conduct interviews of those people, you know, in preparation for hearings. And then in 2023, you know, I had the ability to then travel to Guantanamo and, you know, see it firsthand. I had seen it from the remote sites, you know, since they started it there, and, you know, and also from, you know, the victim side of it there. You know, so, you know, just some of the technical issues there. The reason is that delay is that, you know, a lot of the material that's covered, you know, is classified. So inadvertently there, because there's such a large volume of, you know, material, there'll be what they call spillover. Somebody will mention something there that they shouldn't have that's classified, and then the people that are monitoring that process there will hit a light, and then the monitors will go black, and then they'll resolve it. You know, so, you know, that's the purpose of having that delay for the spillover. And, you know, just so the, you know, as Colleen described there with the courtroom settings there, you know, having spent numerous days in state, local, and federal court, you know, it's completely different than those experiences there. You know, if you're in federal court in New York or anywhere, you know, you have the liberty of getting up and going out. You know, here, you know, everything is sort of regulated. So even, you know, for if you have to use the bathroom, you know, you have to be escorted. You know, after having gone through 2 layers of security there. You know, and as was mentioned, you know, there's a curtain to separate the family members from the NGOs and the media, you know, and so it's sort of, you know, presented somewhat of an adversarial way, you know, and it's left up to the families whether or not, you know, they want the curtain to be closed or not. You know, it's kind of, you know, ridiculous in my point, because, you know, to get to the media and the NGO side, you have to walk past the family members. So it's almost like, you know, but, you know, it's very regulated. I mean, to go there, for all of us there, because it's a Navy base, they have to issue you orders. That's part of the process, So, and you have to have a passport to travel there. You can't, without a passport, you can't travel there. So, the whole process itself, is very different than a court that would be here in the United States. Even when court's not in session, you're under escort, so, you don't feel as if you have the freedom that you would, back here.
Well, it's interesting that you've talked about keeping them separate, yet, what John was saying, that you're all traveling on the same plane.
Yeah.
So, how's that?
The plane, it's basically broken up into sections there. Victim family members are given, what would be the equivalent of first class, but right across from you is the judiciary, along with the judge, but you're not allowed to have any communication. And then the back of the plane is for the NGOs, the media, so, it's, and for a while, it's a charter plane. Some of the conditions of the charter plane weren't exactly, prior to them getting a different contract, the charter plane we were flying on still had ashtrays. So that gives you some idea of the age of the plane, and you did hear some rattling noises at times, but but it's a very unique experience there. And the challenge with it there is that because it's gone on for so long, a lot of the victim family members are elderly, or have some other issue that makes travel very difficult. There was one trip, probably 5 trips back there that I accompanied 2 of our 84 families that suffered losses on 9/11 there, and the Tejans, they were 84 and 82, but they, in pursuit of justice, they wanted to travel there, and endure all of those issues, to see firsthand, and. As Deborah mentioned there, it's the process is intimidating to people until they see it firsthand. And then the other thing that impacts them is being in the courtroom with the same people that are being accused, of planning the attacks there. Especially, and not to single any one of them out there, but when you're in the courtroom and you see Khalid Sheikh Mohammed there with his bright orange-red beard. And the thing that always impacts me is that, knowing, what a lot of the victims went through on 9/11, none of them looked any worse for wear, so, but you also, and some people have mentioned this, there is that, their minds have, convinced them that they're this big evil presence. But when they see them in person there, that diminishes there. They see them for, what they are,
Yeah, they're not very tall. And that was one of my great anxieties. I had taken a couple of beta blockers before I went to court for the first time. And they don't always show up also in the courtroom. But the first week I went, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was in the courtroom, and then the next day, I think Benatosh was there, and the day after that. So by the end of the week, all 4 of the detainees who are currently part of the proceedings had come to the courtroom. And I had built up this anxiety, this angst over making eye contact, or even just putting my eyes on these I struggle to say people, these monsters. And I didn't know how I was going to react to that. But yeah, they again, they're small. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed has like, a Kool-Aid colored beard, and they just look like cartoon characters to me. It's sort of surreal, but it broke that that barrier that I had created in my own mind.
Is there any interaction with the detainees?
No.
Because I had heard a story from one family member that was there, and they had taken a paper and made it into a plane and thrown it toward. Is that a true story, or?
Yeah, I think that was not the 9/11 case where that happened, the
Okay.
paper airplane. But there's generally no interaction between the courtroom and the viewing gallery. It's actually prohibited by the courtroom rules, so even attorneys who you might have spoken to outside, if they're walking by the glass, they're not supposed to wave to you, and if they do, you're not supposed to acknowledge them. So.
Well, and John, you've been there for so many years. I wondered if you could speak a little bit about the changes that you've seen over time. You talked, during our webinar about, how they enter in, what their permissions are. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think overall it's probably become, as the detainees have aged a little bit, and I think when they were in plea negotiations with the government, I think things seem to ease up a little bit, where they used to have guards walking on either side of them and escorting them kind of by touch to their table. They now kind of walk in on their own with a guard trailing behind. They generally live, as we understand it, pretty communally in the detention camp, so I think that was one of the issues with the plea deals. I think the plea deals would have prevented the government from seeking the death penalty. The government would agree not to seek the death penalty if they pled guilty, and then sort of how they were living in the detention camp was important to the defense teams. We haven't seen the plea deals are still mostly sealed, but I think it's important for the defendants to maintain kind of like what they have now, which is clearly better than when they first arrived in 2006. So the base itself hasn't changed too much since I've been going. It's a very, very quiet place. I describe it as a small Caribbean beach town. There's not a lot going on. There's a few bars, a few restaurants. There's some beaches that people go to, but it's really pretty quiet. Living in Brooklyn, it's a big difference. But I think for a while we thought, well, gee, is it going to change because President Trump decided to send migrants there? That hasn't really become a big thing, as you probably have heard. It's been used mainly as kind of a temporary staging ground. So the base from when I've been this year hasn't changed much at all. It's about probably 4,000 to 5,000 people, and it is true. It's an interesting mix, as Jack said. It's a very secure place, but it's also pretty quiet and relaxing at the same time.
How many people go on the plane? I mean, you talked about the.
Yeah. So the Pentagon pays for all the lawyers. So in addition to the prosecution, every defense team is funded by the Pentagon, sort of as you would in, I guess, a federal death penalty case where if the defendant wasn't paying for his own lawyer, which is a lot of the time, they would get a very highly qualified lawyer. So that's how the case works. And the defense teams have 20 to 25 people on them, including sometimes 5 to 7 lawyers. So it's a huge muscle movement, as the military calls it. And one of the defendants is no longer part of the case because he's been declared mentally incompetent. That's why it went from 5 to 4. But it's still a huge operation. And having the remote facility that Colleen talked about has lessened that. Now lawyers can watch and practice from and argue from and question witnesses from the remote site in the National Capital Region. But still, it's a huge, it's 100 people will go for a 9/11 case
I think that's one of the things that also impacts, family members there is that, because it's a capital case, they're entitled to what is called a learned attorney. That's a civilian attorney that has handled a capital case before. But in addition to that, because it's a military tribunal, they're also assigned a JAG, or a lawyer from the military, and in some cases, multiple lawyers, depending upon their time and grade. So when you're sitting there, on a defense side, you'll see as many as 40 to 50 people, and then you look on the prosecution side, and you'll see maybe 6 or 8. So, again, from a victim's family standpoint there, that hasn't always been well received to see that much support, for the people responsible for the attacks versus the prosecution.
Well, and that limits then the number of families that can go over.
So the other thing there is that from a family visitor standpoint, they're pretty much capped at 10. But the other thing that impacts that is that there are other cases there that haven't been resolved. The USS Cole and the Bali bombing. So if they have hearings that are going on at the same time, as is the case coming up there during 1 week in which currently there are sessions scheduled, is that so there'll be 5 spots for 9/11 and there's 5 spots for the USS Cole. So, and the USS Cole, like the 9/11 case, dates back to 2000. That hasn't been resolved yet. So, the 17 sailors that were killed, along with the number that were injured, are still also waiting for justice.
Is there anything, Deborah, from your experience that stands out? You talked about, how you feel, more comfortable now than you did when you were initially going. I mean, speak to the family members and, about, your thoughts on if they're considering going.
Yeah, well, what stands out for me is that it's an experience that not only engages you and educates. I've received an education in what's going on, but on the other hand, it is about the camaraderie with not only other family members, but even with counsel and with the Victims Witness Assistance Program. They're really there for us. And when court is not in session with the Victims Witness Assistance and the other family members, we're all dining together. You don't have to go out to eat if you don't want to. But we sometimes court is canceled, so we may go to the beach, we may take a boat ride, we get a tour of the base, we get to meet with the Marines and learn more of the history. So it's the experience is beyond what goes on in the courtroom. It's beyond what goes in the boardrooms. And to give you an example, in January, my son, Dylan, who is now 28, came along for the first time. And he was extremely nervous. And he was asking lots of questions. And everyone, including counsel, are just so gentle and very good at breaking it down for wherever you are on that spectrum of understanding. And one day we did take a boat ride, and we went to a beach that had a place where they could climb up. And when you're there at Gitmo, we get Army reservists who are assigned to us, like a concierge, and they drive us everywhere. They drive us to the NEX, which is like the grocery store. If we're at court and we don't feel well, they drive us back to the hotel. There's a family room there. So they'll take you to the family room. Whatever you need, they're there for you. And so they had come along on the boat ride, and they're about the same age as Dylan. And they all climbed up to this rock or whatever. And I have a photograph of them on this beautiful blue day with it looks like crystals kind of dancing in Guantanamo Bay. And they are diving off together into the water. And so
What a contrast to what's going on
a
there, right?
contrast
Yeah.
to what's going on, but it really allows you to relax in that atmosphere. And they also, Victims Witness Assistance Program also sends a counselor to come along as well. And it's war court. It's not something I would have chosen to do 20 years ago, but it's also fellowship.
One thing I started doing over the last, I guess, like 5 trips there, and again, to take that break down that barrier, is that, I've met with the defense attorneys,
Yeah.
with family members. So again, just like viewing the enemy combatants in court, they have that one-on-one with the defense attorneys there that also seems to have taken down barriers there.
Yes.
Especially with the defense attorneys that are part of the military. To see them in court in uniform, defending these people, and then meeting with them and having that interaction with them there, I think has been useful.
Well, and Colleen, have you been involved in any other way? Have you gone to the off-site
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up,
locations?
because
Yeah.
I originally went for the first time at the arraignment, which was in May of 2012, and I went to Fort Hamilton here in Brooklyn. So family members and first responders are eligible, if you will, to watch the proceedings through closed-circuit TV from Fort Hamilton in Brooklyn, Fort Dix out near Trenton, Fort Devon up near Boston, and also Fort Meade, which is open to the general public down in the Washington, D.C. area. There's talk of other sites to be opened out in Long Island and possibly on the West Coast, but right now we're really in a lull with the case. Because it's been appealed to the DC Circuit, and it may eventually get appealed to the Supreme Court. So right now it's purgatory, actually. I was going to say it's on hold, but it feels like purgatory because we're waiting yet again, and who knows how long that will take. But there are opportunities for family members to travel both in person to the island, but also to see it stateside. And just because resources, you can also follow the case at the military. The Pentagon has set up a website, mc.mil, so MC for Military Commission, .mil for military, and you can look on the website, you can see transcripts of what has happened, you can see how to engage the Victim Witness Assistance Program that Deborah has mentioned, to be able to travel and to put your name in the hat as well. And there's just tons of information there too. And I do want to emphasize how well taken care of you are as a family member. Both physical needs and emotional needs are very well addressed. I do travel as an NGO mostly, and we stay in a tent, and the latrine is the latrine, and it's a very different experience. And when you travel as a family member, you're sitting up in first class with the judge, but you can't talk to him, and you're staying in a hotel, so you're very well taken care of, and people really recognize the difficulty of a trip like this. So.
The question I had too, is there any other way for families to be involved? I mean, to keep up to date with it, but can they submit a victim witness statement, or is there anything like
well,
that?
So that's.
That's an open question.
So, yeah. Part of, and again, because it's a military tribunal, things are different than if it was a federal court. At some point, if they get to that point where, there's a plea worked out there, there will be the opportunity for family members to submit a witness impact statement.
Right.
That's, down the road a bit,
Yeah. But, and one important point, if I could interrupt, some families, because, look at my family, my parents, some families have, through the prosecution, made victim impact statements already because they were quite elderly. I'm thinking of Lee Hansen. Lee traveled, God bless him, to Guantanamo in his 80s. It was closed court. Lee gave a statement. That was years ago, and unfortunately, Lee has now passed as well. So for family members who knows how long this is going to take, you can reach out to the prosecution and arrange to have a statement, because we don't know how long.
Well, we're out of time, and we could probably go on for a while here, but the way that you can learn more is to meet with John and purchase one of his books, and he probably will run out of them today. How else can they get a book if you run out of supply here?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. It's just on Amazon and bookshop.org, and most other independent sites or bookstore websites will have it for purchase. So.
Can you tell us the name of it again?
Yeah, it's Mercer. Yeah, that's it.
America's Trial. So let's give everyone a round of applause. And